Hi there. At the end of our last class, I said we would move on to something quite different this week. But I've had a week to think about it, and I think it's important that we do finish the basic introduction to commas. So we're going to start by looking at the 5 main mistakes that people make with commas, and then we're going to look at some other areas of punctuation. Now, that might not sound very exciting, but it has to be done at some stage. Let's do that now, and then next week we'll move on to the more interesting topic. Here we have 5 sentences. Each sentence is written twice in columns A and B, and for each sentence one version is correct and the other version has a comma mistake. We have 5 different types of comma mistake. Pause the video now to read the sentences and decide which versions are correct. Okay. Have you worked it out yet? In column A, all of the sentences are correct, and in column B, they're all incorrect. Number 1. The Queen and I went shopping. Why would you have a comma there, splitting the subject from the main verb? You wouldn't say I, went shopping. So that's a very basic mistake, but I do see it sometimes. Not that often, I must admit, but sometimes. Just make sure that you know that you don't put a comma there. Number 2. Which version am I reading out loud? Is it A or B? The bartender, who was serving drinks, left the room. That's A, the correct version. You're just saying the bartender left the room, and who was serving drinks is extra information. This is a non-defining relative clause. It's just extra information about the bartender. In B, you have the bartender who was serving drinks left the room. That makes no sense. Either you need to have 2 commas or no commas. So with no commas, it will be the bartender who was serving drinks left the room. So who was serving drinks, that defines which bartender you mean, compared to the bartender who was cleaning up sick left the room. Three. Madonna, who is American, is rich. Okay, so this is also extra information here. You don't need that to understand who Madonna is. It's just extra information. It's also non-defining. So the mistake in 3. So if you remember in number 2, the mistake was only 1 comma when you needed when you needed 2 or no commas. In 3, you can't really have this without any commas. That doesn't work. Unless there's more than 1 Madonna. And then you might say, the Madonna who is American is rich, compared to the Madonna who is Canadian is poor. I don't know, sorry Canada. Okay. Number 4. Which one am I reading out loud? The house on the corner of Kirkwood and Leeds Road is on fire. You can hear that's B. Imagine if you were to say this sentence though, if you phoned for the fire brigade to come and sort out the fire. You need to know this information about the house, and so it's actually A which is the correct form. The house on the corner of Kirkwood and Leeds Road is on fire. Okay. And 5. We went to the shop. I bought a cat and 2 bananas. That's A. That's the correct version. 2 sentences, 2 separate ideas or thoughts or whatever. So the problem here in 5B is that there's a comma splice. There's a comma used instead of a full stop. And if I was to read this out loud, it would be, we went to the shop, I bought a cat and 2 bananas. I can't even read that out loud properly. Okay, so if any of those are typical mistakes that you make, then put them down on your editing list so you can always check your work before you hand it in to make sure you haven't made any mistakes like this. Okay, now let's move to other areas of punctuation. 5 pieces of punctuation for you to use. 1. Full stops, or American English periods, obviously. By the way, if we have a number, for example, 0.5, so half, then we say point. Number 2, commas, okay. Number 3, hyphens, that's a very small, very short horizontal line within a word, such or as a compound, so a 5-day week, a 10-legged monster. Numbers 4 and 5 you might not need to use. Number 4 is double quotation marks, but on this course you're unlikely to be doing any quoting. But notice that when we do use them, we use the 66-99 system and not the German low 99, high 66. The same is also true for single quotation marks, which look like a 6 and a 9 depending on the font. You could use them for the use mention distinction. Compare, for example, cheese is a dairy product. Here we're using the word cheese. And how do you spell cheese? There we're mentioning the word cheese, but we're not using it. You can do a Google search of use mention distinction. It will take you to the Wikipedia page. They even have their own cheese example there. Right, now let's look at 5 pieces of punctuation that you cannot use. 1. Don't use question marks. In your essays, we want you to actually make points. If you ask a question, then you're not actually saying anything. You won't be asking any questions. Number 2, don't use exclamation marks, American exclamation points. I know that as Germans, you might feel that you have to because Germany has a love affair with exclamation marks and often uses 3 at a time or even more. In English, we use them far less frequently, and in academic writing, we don't use them at all. 3. These are dashes. These are horizontal lines between words. There are actually 2 types. There's the N dash, which is the width of the letter N, and the M dash, which is the width of the letter M. The M dash is particularly common in America in magazines, for instance. Listen, you don't need to know anything else about dashes because you won't be using them. They're not seen as being formal enough. Number 4, we've got various different symbols here. We've got the ampersand for and, which I used on the last slide, but that's because I needed the space. Forward slash, backward slash or backslash, 3 dots, which are that's also called the ellipsis, and so on. Don't use any of those things. 5. In normal language, we often say i.e., das heißt, e.g., zum Beispiel, etc. These Latin abbreviations. For academic writing, especially at our university, we don't want you to use any Latin abbreviations. So for i.e., you'd have in other words or thus, e.g., for example, for instance, such as, etc., and so on and so forth, although normally you wouldn't need to use that because you would have written something more precisely. Okay. Right, let's see what's optional. Colons can be used to introduce lists, but we want you to use words instead. Colons can also be used between 2 clauses or 2 sentences to show the relationship between them, that one is the result of others, but we want you to use linking words instead, and that's more normal anyway. Semicolons are very rare nowadays. They can be used in 2 ways. They can be used to separate complicated items on a list. We don't want you to do that. And they can be used between 2 sentences when there's a very close connection. But then there are strange rules. You have to change the grammatical subject. So, for example, I went to the park, semicolon, I got wet. That wouldn't be any good because I is the subject for both parts. So you'd have to say, I went to the park, semicolon, it was raining. Then you've got to change from I to it. I'm not sure if those two sentences were really closely enough connected to use a semicolon. My advice, don't use colons or semicolons unless you really know how to use them. Right, we're now going to look at apostrophes. The apostrophe is on your keyboard. It's next to the enter or return key on the right hand side, about halfway up the keyboard. It's not on the top row, those are the French accents. Okay, on this slide we'll look at situations where you have to use the apostrophe, and that's for possessives or the genitive. Okay, number 1, David's book. You wouldn't say the book of David, so with someone's name. The man's book. You wouldn't say the book of the man. That would be weird. Okay, so that's with a person. You can also use it for geographical places such as cities and countries. I suppose you could say the underground system of London, but it would be more common to say London's underground system. Number 2, you can't use it for inanimate objects. So rather than the table's legs, we would normally say the legs of the table. Now let's look at whether we use apostrophe S or S apostrophe. Number 3, you've got one girl. You've got the coat that belongs to her, the girl's coat. So you've got the singular word girl and you just add apostrophe S for the possessive. If she has more than one coat, it's the same, the girl's coats. Number 4, you've got 2 or more girls. So here, the plural for girl is girls with an S on the end. So we've already got that, so we just add the possessive, in this case just with the apostrophe, after the plural form. So the girl's coat, if they only have one coat that they share, or the girl's coats. So lots of girls, lots of coats. Okay. Notice that the singular, one girl, one coat, the girl's coat, apostrophe S, and the plural, plural girls and plural coats, the girls, apostrophe coats, they sound the same. Okay, so the apostrophe to show possessive, that comes after the plural form. So let's look at some exceptions. So in number 5, we have examples where the plural is an exception to the normal rule. So the woman's coat, that's one woman, one coat, apostrophe S. But of course the plural of woman is women. So you've got the women's coats. Women is already plural. So then we add the apostrophe and the S sound after the plural. The lady's coat. But then the plural of lady is ladies. And so we just add the apostrophe. We don't add another S. We don't say the ladies'. Okay? And you can see the child's. Of course, the plural is children. And so the apostrophe comes to show the possessive that comes after children, and then we have the S sound as well. The persons, and then the plural of person is people. You might see the word persons in some weird situations, like if you're in a lift, an elevator, and you see a sign saying maximum 10 persons, and you think to yourself, who wrote that? That's weird. That's too official. So for this course, never use the word persons. The plural of person is people. So you can see the persons, apostrophe S. People, of course, is already plural, so you've got the apostrophe and then the S. What if someone's name ends with an S? Like Gladys. Well, you've got a choice. You can either add apostrophe S or just an apostrophe. How people will read that, Gladys's Gladys, often doesn't depend on how it's written, it depends on their personal preference for when they read it out loud. Number 7 is a little bit different. I just thought I'd add it here. This is the equivalent to bei in German. So I have 2 parents, and so if I'm at their house, I'm at my parents'. Apostrophe S. It's as if that's short for at my parents' house or at my parents' place. Likewise, if you were at my place, please never come here. But if you were at my place, you would be at David's. Apostrophe S. We use this for shops as well, so at the baker's. In American English, in this case, it would be at the bakery. In Britain, the bakery is the place where they actually bake bread. At the estate agents, in American English, that would be at the realtor's office, something like that, typically. At the doctor's, in Britain, that might be short for at the doctor's surgery. We use the word surgery for the place where a doctor works. In American English, they would actually say the doctor's office. And look at here, we've got W.H. Smith. That's the name of a chain of newsagents in Britain. But typically, when people refer to shops, they add the apostrophe S very often in normal speech anyway. So they'd say at W.H. Smith's. That's not so relevant for this academic writing course. I just thought I'd put it in there. Okay, now let's see when you can't use the apostrophe. So in academic writing, you can't use the apostrophe for contractions. That's words like he's, they'll, aren't, won't, doesn't, can't, would've, which is slang anyway. Instead, you have to write the words separately. So he is, they will, are not, will not, does not, cannot. Actually, cannot we write as one word, C-A-N-N-O-T. It's an exception. And there you've got would have as well. Okay, I know that normally people want to say abbreviations instead of contractions, so let's quickly look at to see what abbreviations are. We saw we had the Latin abbreviations, i.e., e.g. before. Here we have some more. So the UK, USA, EU, that's where we use the letters from the words. Notice when you've got an abbreviation which you can read as one word, it's called an acronym. So NATO, we don't say NATO. Instead, we read it as a word, NATO, UNICEF, UNESCO, or whatever. If you were to refer to any of these things in writing, you would write them out in full the very first time with the abbreviation or acronym in brackets afterwards, like in this example. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, has been important for blah blah blah. Indeed, NATO is considered to have been instrumental in blah blah. Okay. Right, so now we're going to look at one last thing, and this is not punctuation, but now seems to be a good time to look at it. We're going to see which pronouns we can use on this course. We saw that we can't use the apostrophe for contractions because they are too informal for academic writing. Let's consider which pronouns are seen to be formal enough for academic writing. I, no. So you won't be writing anything in the first person. You, no. And I know that in this summer semester, people always want to write you constantly in their work. I'm sorry, you can't. I know we do this when we speak, but you won't be using you at all on this course. He, she, it, yes. One, no, not really. One is very old-fashioned. It seems the older members of the royal family in Britain might use one. If you are in a grammatical emergency, we'll let you use one, but in general, please don't use one. It's weird. We, no. Listen, in the world of academic writing, there are some people who sometimes use we in a certain way. It's called the inclusive we, when you try to include the reader. So you might write, now that we have considered blah, we will turn our attention to blah. We won't be doing that. Okay, so you can't use we. They, oh yes, you'll be using they a lot. And in fact, you'll normally be referring to people, students, children, tourists, visitors, and so on. Notice that we refer to people, etc., in the plural, and we use they, and that means we don't have the problem with he or she, because you can't just write if a person blah blah blah, then he will blah blah. That's just sexist. It's old-fashioned. So we write, if people blah blah blah, then they will blah blah blah. It gets around the problem, and it's pretty much standard nowadays. Okay, so you might think that's quite limited. You can use he, she, it, and you can use they. But we also have many other constructions. For example, with the dummy it, passive voice, and so forth. We'll be looking at those things on the grammar course as well. Okay, I think that's enough today, so here I am again to round things up. Next week, we're looking at 5 main areas of lexis, or vocabulary, which you need to know about for academic writing. Over the next 7 days, I want you to think about what kind of language is or is not suitable for academic writing. See you then.